Everybody, welcome back to Conscientious Omnivore. My name is Pal. Today I'm going to be doing a very serious video for everybody. I think it's very relevant, especially with everything that's going on right now in the US as far as protests go, and just really what I view as kind of like a major problem all over the world. And it's a very sensitive topic for a lot of people, and yeah, I basically want to cover a few ideas and talk a little bit about racism and give my own perspective on it and my own background, and even explain why I was actually kind of a quiet racist myself at one point in my life, and what caused me to change and what opened my eyes to see it for what it is, to see that I was racist, even though I would probably have never admitted that, and probably wouldn't have even admitted it to myself at the time. But now looking back on it with additional knowledge and just kind of like more perspective and experience, I realized that that was the case. So I want to talk about these things. They're very serious. This video is going to probably be pretty long. I encourage everybody to go and look at all the stuff I'm sharing. There's a lot of reading that you can do on this topic yourself, and I'm sure that regardless of where you're watching this in the world, you can probably find and experience racism wherever you are, sadly, and you can find your own information for whatever area of the world you're living in. And then hopefully at the end, what I'm going to do is make what I think is a good recommendation for people to recognize racism and to acknowledge it, and realize how important it is that we fight this and stamp it out, basically. And yeah, that's kind of the point of the video. So with that said, let's jump in. I'm going to share a bunch of stuff with you guys. And for anybody who's watching this and doesn't have the context, obviously, like in the US, it's probably been, front page news for a while now, but there's been a lot of demonstrations since the, yet again, another needless killing of a black American by police. With excessive force. Sadly, it's like every other week there's like an instance of this happening, it seems like, and this is just one of many, sadly. And now people just seem to be kind of at a breaking point, I think, with the pandemic that's going on, as well as all the economic hardships, as well as all the other kind of stresses that people are facing, losing their jobs, losing loved ones from a horrible disease, not being able to go back to work, not being able to go back to school, being under stress with your kids, etc., etc. I think it's just like a boiling point of all the things that are going on, all the political tensions, all the kind of ugliness going on in the world at the moment, especially like in the U.S. right now. It's just very, very tense, and I think that has really kind of helped spur these protests, and why they haven't just gone away after a few days or weeks as they have in the past. So I just wanted to briefly highlight this figure, which many people, especially not from the U.S., might be shocked at. Although I would say probably even people living in the U.S. would be shocked by these numbers. Between 2013 and 2019, so that's just a period of 6 years, police in the United States have killed 7,666 people. That's according to data compiled by Mapping Police Violence, a research and advocacy group. And that is a huge figure. I mean, just unbelievable how many people police kill each year in the U.S. And the point here at the end that you can see is that basically it's disproportionately affecting black people. So despite making only 13% of the U.S. population, black Americans are 2.5 times as likely as white Americans to be killed by the police. In some states, it's actually far worse. As you can see here down at the bottom, in Utah, for example, they account for just 1.06% of the population, black people meaning, and they accounted for 10% of the police killings. So that's over 9 times the amount of black people killed as a proportion of the population. Many other states, it's like 5%, but they comprise 20% of the killing. So it's like 4 times, 5 times, etc. I mean, it's just insane. And you can see where it's kind of in more disproportionate than others, but it's just a huge problem. And I also do not want anybody to think that that this is just all black people. These are just all people killed. So there's many white people. There's many people of all ethnicities, all colors killed by police. And I think it is a huge problem. The militarization of police worldwide is a huge problem. You can just look in other countries. It is a constant threat to democracy and to peaceful protest and all around the world. There's problems with this, but with America, I think it's just so I don't know, like just so blatant and so strong. Like the excessive use of force by police against citizenry is just staggering. Just to put this in perspective, this 7,666 people between those 6 years, the total number of Americans killed in Iraq, a war zone, between 2003 and 2020, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. This stat is only for 2010, but they had 4,487. So in 7 years, it's an extra year more in a war zone, and they still had 4/7 or whatever. It's a little more than half the number of people killed as the number of people killed by police in the U.S. So it's just a mind-boggling statistic. I think just if anybody doesn't realize the severity of the problem, this should help kind of explain that, and people should be worried. Like I say, in the U.S., the excessive force used is just kind of like to new heights. This is an image that was pretty popular on Twitter, and you can see a policeman basically, almost like pointing a one of these pellet guns or whatever these are called, these beanbag firing guns, at this little boy who's sitting on his father's shoulders. And people defending the police, I've seen comment that it's a non-lethal firearm and stuff like this, but at that range that could easily kill somebody, especially a small child. So this is just ridiculous. They've also tried to defend this police officer's actions by saying that the angle of the photograph is off, and he's not actually pointing it at the kid or near the kid. He's actually kind of off to the side. In any way you look at it, it's way too close for my comfort. I think it's just completely ridiculous that police are allowed to have all this militarized gear, and but this video is not about this per se, but it's just something that I wanted to cover. And I feel very strongly that worldwide, the militarization of police and the way that they act against civilian people is totally uncalled for, and I wholeheartedly condemn it. So but I just wanted to say that. Now here is another example where in Catalonia they were going to have a referendum and have a vote, and basically the Spanish government brutally dispersed crowds on the day of the vote and kept people away from ballots. Again, just think of the craziness of this. This is like supposedly a democracy, supposedly a right to go and vote. They weren't looting, they weren't doing anything even remotely illegal, but because the government didn't want people to be able to express their vote for a referendum to have their autonomy and an independent state, they basically brutally suppressed people and beat people and all this kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, the media here is kind of another thing that's complicit in a lot of these things. They put this cute little headline up here that did voters face the worst police violence ever seen in the EU, and they're just talking about how various people have said like there's fake photos of police violence floating around and all this kind of stuff. And what they did was it was shown that some pictures were recirculated from previous protests that were violently put down by police. Like, for example, this one, the disabled man in the wheelchair is actually not being beaten by the police during the Catalonia vote he was actually being beaten violently by police during a austerity, measure counter protest. So, like, that's supposed to make me somehow feel better that no, he wasn't being beaten because he was trying to go vote. He was being beaten because he was somehow standing up against austerity measures, and just crazy stuff. Like, this was another thing where it was a reused image from a firefighter's protest, I guess. And then the police came in and violently attacked the firefighters, and somebody was trying to say that, like, this was part of the Catalonian process. So they're just reusing images. And then the article kind of ends by saying that, yes, most of the violence that was depicted in pictures and videos online about the violence in Catalonia was legitimate and real. So it just kind of ends by explaining that, yes, there was excessive force and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, back to the interest, to the topic at hand here. In the U.S., again, I think just the level of police oppression, specifically of minorities, black people in general, or black people specifically, I should say, is just on such another level that it's just, it reminds me of the worst kind of like dehumanizing, racist kind of like things possible. There was a recent case here where in Colorado, police pulled over a lady with her children in an SUV. They mistook her SUV for a stolen motorcycle from another state. If you just read this sentence, it already just kind of sets off alarm bells in your head. How are they pulling over an SUV as a stolen motorcycle? Like, what the heck is going through these people's minds? I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't tend to be a pessimistic person, but when I see things like this, and when I see people capable of putting children handcuffed with their hands behind their back, placed face down on black asphalt on a hot day, and when the kids are crying and clearly distressed, I find it incredibly difficult to give people the benefit of the doubt. These people, I think, are racist. There is no way you can do this as part of your job and not, use your conscience and just look the other way and do this. It is systemic. It is something that you see on at least a weekly or bi-weekly basis, where you see some type of police person or persons doing something extremely above and beyond excessive force, like way above and beyond excessive force, and it is just disproportionately targeted towards black people. People of color in general, I would say, but especially black people. And, there's just so many cases like where you just see that it is systemic. It's the whole police force. There's a case here in Baltimore where it was revealed that cops were going around carrying fake guns so that they could plant them on people that they would shoot. This one officer who was involved in the corruption scandal, he admitted that they would bring the replicas with them in case we accidentally hit somebody or got into a shootout, so we could plant them. They would bring toy guns and then just throw them in the car or whatever. Oh, we just found this on the guy. It looked like he had a gun. We shot him, whatever. And again, this is just one case of many where evidence has been planted, drugs have been planted, evidence has been covered up, all these kinds of things. People busting down the wrong doors, people shooting people in their beds, like at home, like just the list goes on and on and on and on. It is insane what is happening. Like I'm not surprised people are fed up by it, and that they're resorting to getting out in the streets and and demanding change. And I think it should keep happening. People need to realize the level of the systemic racism that is happening, and they shouldn't let it just die down and go away and wait for the next unarmed black person to be killed for no good reason whatsoever, other than the fact that many people are racist, and these police are basically bullies who are willing to kill almost willy-nilly because they know they can get away with it. It's ridiculous. In the U.S., they have the most number of people incarcerated in the entire world. It is part of a basically like a good scheme to keep prison populations full and working. There's many people who make lots of money from keeping poor black people in jail, and that is a huge problem. If you just look at these stats here, in the U.S. they have almost 2.2 million people in jail. That is 737 per 100,000 people. It is the highest rate of the whole entire world. If you look, China even pales in comparison. Like, they only have 118 people per 100,000 people in jail. Even their total number is lower than that of the U.S., even though they have over 1 billion people, and the U.S. just has over 330 million or whatever it is. So, I mean, it is just unbelievable, like, the amount of people incarcerated and basically working for pennies per hour, doing hard manual labor in some cases. When there were the big forest fires in California, a few years back, they were using prison population to help fight the fires with almost like little to no training, very little in the way of protective gear, and they were being put out there as almost like a volunteer, like, fire squad, putting them in grave danger, fighting forest fires with little to no training and inadequate protections. And that is just one of the ways. But there are many companies that have prison labor make their products. There was a great documentary by, what's the guy's name, Michael Moore, like a while back, where he talked a little bit about this, about the prison population and the work they're forced to do. I mean, it's shocking when you see the types of people that are incarcerated for nonviolent crime and just basically forced to work. And I can't help but think that it's systemic, that it's intentional. Like, of course it is. You would have to be insane to believe that it's not. And these problems go back a long time ago, and they are not new. There have been many, many times where people have gotten fed up with black people who have formed communities and been prosperous, and then some kind of trumped up, like violence or something came up against a black person, who usually, it always turns out that it's like some random thing that isn't proven. There's no like evidence, there's no witnesses, it's just one person's claim. Then it just somehow devolves into like some white mob going in and like just looting and pillaging and destroying an entire black community. The one that I had never even heard of, interestingly enough, this isn't taught in the history curriculums of schools. And for anybody who's watching, I do live in Europe now, but I went through all my schooling in the U.S. So I did all my schooling from first grade all the way through college in the U.S. And I can tell you right now that we never had things like this covered. The atrocities in various parts of like South America, Asia, Vietnam, all the different wars that have happened since World War II. It's like none of that stuff ever gets covered. None of the civil rights movement gets covered. These kinds of things, these kinds of race riots, as they're called, none of these get covered in the standard history curriculum. At least they didn't when I went to school in the U.S. This happened where basically, again, a white lady basically made some kind of claim that she was assaulted by a black person. He was, brought up in front of the police, and even though the lady declined to press charges, a white mob basically arrived to lynch the guy. And because there were black people who were armed to make sure that the guy didn't get lynched for not having done anything wrong, they started instigating the black guys as to why they had firearms with them. And things escalated and got out of control, and a white guy was actually shot and killed. And at that point, the entire city of Tulsa, basically formed a mob and went into what was then called the Black Wall Street, because there was a community of black people, I guess in this place called Greenwood, which was like a suburb or some area of Tulsa. And they just started randomly killing and destroying all the property and killing people, and they murdered what is supposedly over 300 people. It's impossible to know how many people got killed but the devastation was just unbelievable. And the insane thing about this is that not just that you know, the white people, the Ku Klux Klan members, and all these kinds of people took part in these murders. And I'm not going to call it a riot because, of course, the press at the time tried to make it sound like it was a race riot, and actually they put the blame fully on the black community. But what happened is they even had local police and National Guardsmen who aided the mob killing the black people. They dropped bombs from airplanes. National Guardsmen were shooting at people, killing black people. Innocent people had nothing to do with anything, either at the courthouse or with the lady who supposedly got assaulted. None of these things had anything to do with the people being killed. It was strictly that I think it got in the kind of the, in the eye of the white community there, that these black people were getting out of line. They were getting too rich and having too good of a life. Let's just ruin it, and let's just kill them. And this was a great excuse to do it. And just read through this history. It's amazing. I mean, like, the fact that this doesn't even get talked about is mind-boggling. And the fact that police and National Guardsmen were involved in this is just, it's ridiculous. And nobody ever got charged in any of these race riots that have happened. Here's another, before I move on. This is the official report. It was done by a commission from Oklahoma on the race riot, and it breaks down in, very, very, detailed kind of events of like how things happened, where the violence, kind of went from one place to another. They were going to be actually looking for a potential mass grave this year, but unfortunately that has been put off because of the COVID pandemic, actually. And it talks about how, again, bombs were dropped from the air, who was involved. It has pictures. I mean, this is like serious, crazy stuff, and this just doesn't get talked about. And this was only like 100 years ago. You have to remember, this is actually not even 100 years ago, because it was 1921, I believe. So, I mean, you can just see here, like, the Ku Klux Klan here. I mean, it's just unbelievable. People were just getting murdered out in the street. It's just mind-boggling. Like, they raised an entire, I don't know how many block area of a city, and you can see people being hung. I mean, I'm sorry for these images. Like, I apologize, and I should probably put a trigger warning. Maybe I'll do it in the video ahead. I'll timestamp it or something. But I mean, it's just shocking. And the fact that there was never anybody charged in any of these crimes, that just really speaks to you about, the people in charge and what they're able to get away with, and why, people feel like they can commit these horrible acts of violence against vulnerable black people, because they can, and they do, and they get away with it. And it's disgusting. So read through this, look through this. It's just unbelievable. Here is a interview that I found fascinating. She was the last remaining known survivor of the massacre. I'm going to call it what it is. It was a massacre at Tulsa, and she was, I think, 6 years old at the time of the massacre. She's extremely intelligent and well-spoken. And unfortunately, this is just a very short kind of clip with her talking about her experiences and how she went on, to, get higher education and all this kind of stuff. But just unbelievable. And when you think the people who built up this community, they were first-generation ex-slaves. So this is another thing that really irks me when I talk to people who kind of try to wash away a lot of the the current protests or things, the complaints made by black people, that, it was such a long time ago, or like, no, it wasn't a long time ago. This was 100 years ago that this happened. And the people living there were only out of slavery for one generation. So it's not that long ago. There were people living there who were probably ex-slaves themselves, or like old people, like grandparents and what have you, would have been alive during that time easily, and would have been ex-slaves. This is not a long time ago. This is very recent. And sadly, that's not the only one of these kinds of incidents that has happened. Here's another well-known one. This one is called the Rosewood Massacre. This one was in Florida. An entire town was razed and destroyed. Again, almost eerily the same exact kind of thing. A white lady makes a complaint, and before you know it, black people are getting killed and lynched, and their house is burning down, and they destroyed an entire village. The state of Florida actually settled with 11 survivors, like much later in the 80s, I believe, and paid out some amount of money to the surviving family members. And but again, just read up on this. It's shocking. And again, like there were like 1,000 people involved from the nearby communities that came by and just lynched and burned all these people to death. Some of them alive, some of them were shot, some of them were hung. It's unbelievable. And it's not just those two. Like, there was a period of, like, I think it was 6 years, if I remember right, that there was basically this racial violence that, went through the U.S. And again, there are very disturbing images in this, so please, I'm not even going to say please look away. Please look and please absorb this, because this is necessary. And this article just highlights some of these that happened, but they say that basically during those 6 years, there were probably thousands of black people killed in this racial violence during that short couple of years of violence that were precipitated. And these are just some of the pictures documenting this violence. There were they talk about some of the potential causes and why these kinds of violent acts were incited or whatever. Here, there's white people stoning to death a poor black guy laying on the ground here. The police are investigating after. Of course, they did nothing to stop it. Here, it's like everybody's out for a picnic or a stroll, but they're actually standing around the graves of 6 black people who are just buried in unmarked graves, 2 to a grave. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, you have, like, in the 50s, people were sending postcards of pictures of people getting lynched, of black people getting lynched, people sitting around barbecuing, like it was a party. You think, like, how is this possible? This was well within the lifetime of some of the people watching this. I was born in the 70s. This is probably like 20 years before I was around. I mean, this is not that long ago. Here, this is another one where in Elaine, Arkansas, they say 800 black Americans were killed, but only these 12 guys were arrested as like the troublemakers. They arrested 12 guys. They quickly sentenced them to death and put the whole blame all on the black people, even though no white people were charged in the incident. Nobody ever got prosecuted whatsoever, but these guys got sentenced to death. Now, thankfully, through the work of the NAACP and other like people helping these guys, they were later, I guess, their death sentences were commuted. I don't really understand if they were let go, though, so I'm not sure if they said that they were like basically tortured and beaten while they were being under police custody and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just terrible stuff. This one again talks about the Tulsa massacre and a few other ones. I mean, there were a number of these that happened. You can just see here, burning of a church, like how many churches got burned, and all these kinds of things. And one thing that I found interesting in this was they talked about how a lot of these things here. I think that what they said was seeing patterns, that a lot of these massacres all kind of followed the same playbook that I just told you guys. It's basically like some uncorroborated non-evidence backed like claim by some white person was made against a black person. Then oftentimes the violence didn't even start or end even with that black person in question. It just spread to the nearby community that the white people were jealous of, because people were making a good home and a good neighborhood and a good community for themselves with money. And it's just shocking that this kind of thing could go on. One of the things they talk about in this is that here it is. The massacres, Ross said, this was a photojournalist and historian in Tulsa who has spent years investigating the massacre, said that the earlier massacres that led to the Tulsa massacre followed the similar patterns. The massacres were stoked by the film Birth of a Nation, which then President Woodrow Wilson had aired in the White House. The white mobs get their ideas from that highly racially charged film depicting a white woman running in fear of a black man and a white mob led by the Klan destroying the black community. And that is literally what these mobs had done. And this is not something to take lightly. I looked up this Birth of a Nation because I actually was not familiar with it, but it is it basically seems just like a totally racist movie. It was a silent film. It was the longest film ever made at that point. You should read up on it if you guys are interested. It's basically incredibly racist, and to have the President of the United States airing this film in the White House for people really tells you something about kind of how high level the racism goes and went and still goes, sadly, to this day. I just want to add a few more things for your consideration. There are audio recordings of actual slaves who were slaves during their lives in the United States, and they were interviewed. I believe some of these recordings were done in the 30s or like 40s, I believe. And some of these people who were ex-slaves, they were still alive, and there is wonderful archival footage not footage, I guess it's just an audio recording, sorry, of these people's accounts and talking about their lives and how it was being a slave. Again, this is not something that happened a long time ago. There are audio recordings of this available. You can hear firsthand from people what their life was like as a slave. When people get upset about hearing these ideas of having some kind of some kind of settlement paid out for the survivors of slavery, people get so upset and what have you. But this is not from that long ago, and these massacres are most certainly not from that long ago. And this is not something that we're paying for something that happened 200-300 years ago. Well, you can't even pay for that. But I'm just talking about even just for things that happened not even 100 years ago. It's ridiculous. It's just absolutely mind-boggling that people get so upset about these kinds of things. I don't know. I just get really worked up about this, but I really encourage and recommend you to check out these interviews with the various ex-slaves talking about slavery in the U.S. Here's another one. This one is the whole interview with this person who's featured in the other clip, Fountain Hughes, from 1949. It's just amazing, to hear the voice of somebody who was literally bought and sold and owned by somebody. This is from somebody who was alive long enough to be able to record his voice telling his experience. This is not from hundreds and hundreds of years ago where it's just so far in the distant past that you have no control over it and you have nothing to do with it. This is yesterday, in historical, historically speaking. Here's another one, fascinating. Again, just listen and please keep an open mind, and then think about some of these things and see how how systemic and how cruel and barbaric these kinds of acts were. And it's going on today too. And like I said about this movie, there's an interesting movie out now called I think it's called what is it called? The Black Messiah or something, or Judas and the Black Messiah. Judas and the Black Messiah, and it's about Fred Hampton and his life, and basically it's just a movie. And if you're not sure who that is, I didn't know who it was. Please do read up on him. He was basically murdered by police because the FBI got him on his list as somebody they didn't like. And, he was killed as a young man. And basically, the city of Chicago and federal government went in and they were going to arrest him, and they basically killed him. And this movie talks about the person who was basically used by the FBI as an informant and used to infiltrate the Black Panthers and get, kind of dirt on him to try to get some reason to arrest him. And here there's just a little snippet that I just wanted to read you guys. So J. Edgar Hoover issued a directive to prevent the rise of a messiah, hence the title of the movie. Throughout the 50s and 60s, the FBI feared what they called the Black Messiah, which referred to someone who would capably inspire and lead the black nation, which would cause a change in the status quo. These concerns were directed at Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Huey Newton, and Fred Hampton. And again, look at the fates that met all the people on this list. The FBI wasn't kidding around with this stuff. These lists are scary things, and they literally paid people to go and infiltrate movements and put people down. Once they had too many people listening to them and too many people following them, they were gotten rid of. And so, yeah, basically, J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, came up with the term for Black Messiah. And he claimed in a directive that the FBI intended to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. So it's just unbelievable. I mean, it's shocking. And, just as a twist of this, like if you look at there's a movie or a musical now by Disney talking about Hamilton. And this is something that has come up where people have complained about this and said, like, how can they do this in wake of what's going on now, to have a song and dance musical about Hamilton when he owns he didn't own slaves directly, but I guess like his in-laws did, and he bought and sold slaves for them, and then he's somehow as like this protagonist, like good guy, kind of in this musical, like happy, dancing, whatever. And I mean, it's just amazing that like to this day people don't understand the deep roots of slavery right back to the founding of the country, and how much of the economy of the U.S. was built up and created on the stolen labor of people who were literally robbed from their homelands and bought and sold and brought to the U.S. and bought and sold as property, as cattle, and forced to work. And it's just not that long ago that these people were still being literally massacred in the streets. And I'm not talking about the slavery days. And with total impunity, people have gotten away with this. It's just unbelievable. Now, I kind of want to bring this back around to kind of like not just, racism in the U.S. and not just racism against black people, because obviously this is a huge problem worldwide. I mean, there's the, massacre in, Bosnia and Herzegovina. There's just so many examples. Probably the most well-known one is the, the Jewish Holocaust in World War II, but there's the Armenian Holocaust. There's so many Holocausts. I mean, if you just look, here's the genocides in history. This is just a Wikipedia article with these. But, I mean, there are just untold number of various, genocides all over the world. And just the horrific things that people have done throughout the years against each other based on the idea that, like, the other, the person who's not like me, their skin's different, their hair's different, whatever. And the things that people justify to themselves based on these differences is just amazing and shocking, and it's got to end. And sadly, as I said, even with the Holocaust of Jewish people in Europe, sadly they are then, I don't mean it like they, them, like the same people, but like Israel is committing genocide against Palestinian people and committing, grievous acts of violence against civilians, killing people. I mean, it just doesn't end. And there's no, it just seems like people don't understand that it's the same thing. It doesn't matter that you're doing it to somebody else. It's all the same thing. So I just think, like, one thing that I want to focus here on and bring the picture back around is this idea that I have seen vegan activists say that if we had a vegan world, we would be able to solve racism. And this idea has always kind of interested me and has kind of irked me in some ways. In some ways, I think, like, sure, right, like if everybody knew that, the basic idea of veganism was that, we have respect and just basically acknowledge the inherent rights of all sentient beings to live and leave people alone and leave all animals alone, to be free and do, the things that they are, should be entitled to do as kind of like a birthright. Of course, we would have no racism, right? Because if you respect the life of a farm animal, for example, then you would respect the life of a black person if you're a white person, or vice versa, or a Chinese person, or a whatever person. And you would kind of think that makes sense. But then you see weird things, right? Like sometimes I've seen vegans who are racist, and I think, like, how the heck can you possibly be racist? And then, like I said in the beginning of this video, I look back on my own life and why I said I was racist. I grew up in a fairly mixed environment as far as race goes. I went to school and lived in communities and neighborhoods for much of my life when I was growing up in Connecticut that were pretty roughly evenly split. Like, we had roughly, like almost even mix of, black people, some kind of like mix of Puerto Rican or other kind of Hispanic groups, mostly Puerto Ricans though, and then white people. And I went to school all my life in roughly those proportions. So I never felt like, like I had black friends. I never really felt like I was, kind of removed from any kind of like exposure to, to minorities. Like when I actually went to college, it was a bit strange for me because I met lots and lots of white people who had gone to, they had basically lived most of their lives in very kind of like posh areas of Connecticut where they almost didn't encounter black people at all. Like I knew kids in college who literally were in college when they met their first black person. One of my friends in college, he basically said that they only had one black kid in their entire school, like growing up. And even that kid was a mixed race. He was like, I think one of his parents was white. So it's just kind of like, I never felt that I was somehow, kind of, like I wouldn't have wanted to admit that I was racist. I wouldn't have even thought of myself as a racist. But I know now, looking back on it, that I had ideas about black people, about people of color, that I did feel like they were inferior. And it saddens me greatly to even say this now, like, knowing what I know now. But I remember like seeing the kinds of statistics that people love to throw around, who are these basically like closet racist people who I recognize now as closet racist. They're basically like, I think they are racist people. I don't even want to call it closet racist. What I think is like somebody who's racist but isn't brave enough to stand up and admit it, and then they try and basically kind of advocate for this kind of like racist ideology, but without even owning up to it and without admitting that they're racist. So what I mean by this is people like who would support these kinds of like distortions of statistics and things like that, where they would try to show like, like where does violent crime come from, and where does drug sales come from? Oh, it comes from the black communities, and where do the poor students come from, like who don't do well? Oh, they're from the black communities. All these kinds of things. You see people, even black people like Candace Owens and other people like her, who will try to push these statistics and try and twist things around and try to make it seem like it's somehow like the black community's fault for being the kind of the receiving end of these kinds of terrible treatments by police or by people in authority or in power. And I sort of gravitated towards that when I was younger, because what some of these things don't account for is that when you do go to an inner city school, and when I looked around, like in the better part of my school, my schooling, you did see that like, these black people in my class, they weren't doing well, or these white people, they had better grades. But I never thought to look to see what kind of systemic biases might be there to account for that. I never thought to look to see, maybe it's not somebody's fault that they that they aren't doing well in school. I never thought that those kinds of things were there to like systemically oppress black people and people of color. And I didn't see that those same systems were basically helping me. I thought everything was on my own merit, and I now know that that's not true. You look even in the news recently, there is information that shows that even in the UK, you had like rich people paying to have better schools, better grades given to the students of rich white people, basically, but I mean rich people in general, and they gave out poor or worse grades for people who people who are poor. You don't really think about these kinds of things if you're on the receiving end of the benefits. You think of these things when you're on the the receiving end of the detriment. That's when you realize that those things are there. It's a lot easier to see it. And I mean, looking back on it now, I can see how these things would give people these kinds of these feelings of just injustice that they see day in and day out that I never saw. When I was a kid, like we had a pretty traumatic experience during the time of the Rodney King beating in in California. There were a bunch of riots that broke out all over the country when the police officers were acquitted, and we had violence in my own neighborhood. I think basically, it may have even been people that I knew. I don't know. We never found out who did it, but we were sitting at home, and some black kids threw a brick through our window, and they knew that we lived there. So I don't know. I never found out exactly who did it and whatever. But I mean, there was definitely racial tension even when I was growing up. During those times, during the time of the O.J. Simpson trial, all these kinds of things came to the surface, and during those times. I mean, now looking back on it, I can see that I did harbor racist feelings. I did think that, these black people, they're violent and this and that, and they're not working as hard as me in school, and that's why they're not doing as well, and that's why they won't get a good job, and that's why they're poor, and that's why they don't do this and go to college and this, that, and the other. And it's very easy to fall into this kind of trap and fall prey to this mindset, I think, because if you're on the receiving end of these benefits, what you see is that, it kind of comforts your soul to think that A, you're somehow better than somebody, and B, that you don't have to feel sorry for somebody. You don't have to feel empathy for somebody because they somehow deserve it, because they're lesser than you. And, if you had asked me then if I was racist, I would have probably said no, because I don't hate anybody. I don't hate somebody because they're black. I had black friends. This is like the classic thing. Oh, I'm not a racist. I have black friends. And but looking back on it, you have to look at this as if you think that somebody has a greater chance of being violent, or a greater chance of being unintelligent, or a greater chance of being a drug user, or whatever kind of statistic you want to look at, and you think it's because of their race, then you are being racist. And I only wish that I had kind of opened my eyes sooner, but I'm telling you this experience because I want people who may be in a similar situation to really take a hard look at themselves. This is uncomfortable for me to admit this, and I'm sure that if you're feeling some of these things yourself, it's very uncomfortable for you to admit it to yourself. But I think it's really important, and you have to realize that those things are there from systemic, long, not just decades, but hundreds of years of oppression and suppression, and sometimes outright violent massacres. And just like the little example that I gave from the mother with her children being put face down on the hot concrete with their hands handcuffed behind their back, that sends a powerful message to somebody. Imagine being that being your child. Imagine being your child, that is the lesson that they get, is that police can just at random tell them to get out of their car with weapons drawn, guns pointed at them, and put their kids face down. Imagine that is your kid, and based on nothing but just they didn't like the color of that person's skin. Imagine all the examples that you can find about this, and then think, like, how would that make you feel? would you feel like you were part of that society? Would you feel like you wanted to be a part of that society? I mean, I'm just amazed that like people don't get it. I'm amazed that I didn't get it. And I think like another thing that I also want to give as an example is that a lot of times what I see, because I was an immigrant as well, my family, we come from Romania, but we're ethnic Hungarians. There was ethnic tension in Romania. This was like back in the 80s when we left and I went to the US. So, we have kind of a history in the family of knowing about ethnic tension and knowing about these kinds of things that happen and the way people are treated unfairly and what have you. And I think some of that probably contributed to my feeling about these feelings of racism in the U.S. because I figured like, oh, my parents came as an immigrant to this country and we're able to build up our life in a generation. I see what my parents did. They got us through college and all these kinds of things. And I think like somehow that's like, their merit and like our, kind of like capabilities and what have you. And why is it that somebody living in an inner city, a black person can't, it's the classic pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I could do it and my parents did it. And why can't that person do it? They even had more generations to do it than I did. Well, they had more generations, but again, like I say, I didn't know that up until 2 generations ago, they were being lynched out in the street, for not doing anything wrong, and that they would have their whole entire towns burned down and like, hundreds of people killed in one go in one place. I didn't know about that. Nobody was persecuting me to that extent, and if they did, like, who knows, like where I would be. I'd probably be in as bad or worse a shape. And you don't think about these things, and it's really hard. And I think a lot of times with the people that I knew back in my youth who were probably pretty much exactly like me and probably this quiet kind of racist, not racist as in like somebody who hates people of the other race, but more just this kind of quiet, you think you're somehow superior. A lot of the trend that I see now looking back on it, a lot of times I think it actually comes from people who maybe actually experienced some kind of kind of like success story in the U.S. like growing up as well. Like, oh, I'm an Irish immigrant, I'm an Italian immigrant, I'm a whatever immigrant, and like, those people experience the same kind of kind of oppression and some kind of discrimination, and they somehow think that excuses them from doing the same thing. And it's really discouraging when I see that, and I still see it now. That I know people personally who they will look at these kinds of protests that are going on, and they will never admit that they're racist, but yet somehow the protests irk them to a level that really suggests to me that they are, and they don't understand why people are out in the streets, and they don't understand the the level of kind of oppression that black people especially, but really, many people of color have faced and continue to face in the U.S. As evidenced by these police reports that come out seemingly every week. So, I feel like, okay, I've rambled on a lot here and probably going to try to edit this down a little bit, but I want to give a little bit of a hint of what could happen and what could we do to make people realize that these things are not okay, and to make people realize that we are all equal, and given the same chances, people do get the same abilities and can do the same things and achieve the same goals. There's a wonderful lady, her name is Jane Elliott. She did a experiment in her class. She was a teacher. And after Martin Luther King got killed in 1968, she put her 3rd grade students through a bold exercise to teach them about racial prejudice. So in summary here, she divided the children who were all white by eye color, and then told the children that people with brown eyes were smarter, faster, and better than those with blue eyes. And basically there's a really cool video you guys can watch about how this turned out, and people have kind of looked into this as this wonderful thought experiment that she has done multiple times with different students. And the kids really learned about how it feels to be discriminated against based on some physical attribute like their eye color. And she talked about how the children were very deeply affected by being told that they were lesser than. They were extremely negatively impacted by being told that they weren't as smart, weren't as fast, weren't as good, whatever, and they they suffered. And what's more is that the people who were told that they were better, they did do ugly, nasty things to their classmates who they were previously friends with. And then the next day, she flipped the tables and told them that it was actually the other way around. She made a mistake. And what she found was that the people who were really persecuted, they were discriminated against by their classmates. They actually chose to be a lot more empathetic to the kids who were now being told that they were the lesser than. And it really gives you a kind of a good lesson of putting yourself in the other's shoe. I really recommend you guys check out this wonderful lady, check out her work, read this article. It's a good starter kind of on her information. I mean, she talks about little things like even where like how maps distort reality, where like you think somehow like the United States and like the northern hemisphere is somehow bigger than a lot of the countries in Africa or like in South America. And when you actually look at the landmass, it's being distorted because of the Mercator projection and all this kind of stuff. So it's very interesting. And the key thing that I want to just end here from this article is that here she says, Elliot had thought America had made some positive progress in terms of racism, at least until recently. She thinks she knows why. This is the response of white people to 8 years of a black man in the White House, Elliot said. That means that we didn't make progress in the first place. We made people go underground, and that's what they did. Now, she said, it's like when I go off a diet and I eat like a fool. We had to give up our ignorant statements and behaviors for a while, and now the lid is off. People can say anything they want now, even march in the streets with swastikas in their arms, she said, and the Trump would say there were some very fine people among them. Now they can do and be and say anything they want because they can get away with it. Now, I would only add that I think it's been going on for a lot longer than just the 4 years of Trump, but especially now it's been brought to the forefront. And yes, you do hear like open racist talk more now. I think it's like in some ways things have gotten actually a lot worse. Like people don't see that this is a very, very real problem. So I think again, this lady has done a lot to teach people. I think we need to teach people. That's why I'm making this video, because I want people to realize that anybody can change. I can change too, and I can see the error of my ways, and I can see that what I believed was wrong. And there's a lot of information out there that, that made me realize that what I believed and what I thought is not true. And it's really important that people are able to keep an open mind and look into these kinds of things and look to see how history has oppressed black people. And, again, look in your own country for specifics. I now live in Hungary. Hungary has extreme parallels to this that I see with the Roma community. The Roma people here face extreme prejudice from white Hungarians, and they're not usually as dark skinned as like most black people would be in the U.S., but it's usually they're quite a bit darker than the white Hungarians that live here, and it's very easy to distinguish them like based on their appearance, and they do face extreme prejudice, and I hear almost the exact same kinds of things spouted here by people who probably also wouldn't admit that they're being racist by doing this, saying things like, oh, they don't like to work, they don't like to learn, they're not as smart, they're always involved in violence and crime and this, that, and the other. And it's just simply not true. And they don't see the systemic things here that are in place to keep Roma people down as well. And there's very strong parallels. And I'm sure that if you're watching this from somewhere else in the world, you can probably think of your own examples and look at how your neighbors are being treated, and really try to live a day in their life and put yourself in their shoes and try to think how you would experience that, how you would live their life, and then maybe you'll have a little bit more empathy to try and understand that maybe sometimes people are victims of their circumstances, and it's not just a choice to be, whatever it is, uneducated, unemployed, whatever. Like, people have extreme, discrimination that they face on a day-to-day basis, and it impacts their lives in a very real way. So, again, I want to kind of wrap up and just say that I think, to answer the question of, can we have an end to racism by the whole world going vegan? I think it's almost like a circular question. I think it's actually kind of a stupid question. I think we need to end racism. It needs to be done in a parallel with trying to get more people to go vegan as well. I think if you can't convince somebody to not be racist, you're probably not going to be able to convince them to go vegan. So this idea that somehow the world would go vegan and then like that would also end racism, I think is kind of a faulty, reasoning. And like I said, we also see that there are some people who are vegan who are still racist. So that part does boggle my mind. I don't really understand how that's logical to people. But in general, I would say the vast majority of vegans are very much non-racist people, and they very much realize that, people are people, and they will be able to, be just as intelligent and just as smart and just as everything the same if they're given the same chances. And right now, there are so many people in the world that are not given the same chances. And we need to stand together, and we need to support people who are out there. And when people say Black Lives Matter, yes, they do. Of course they do. And when people say, oh, all lives matter, you have to realize, why are you saying that? You're not the one getting, roughhoused by police and having your children put face down on the hot asphalt because they're looking for a stolen motorcycle and they see your SUV with the same license plate number. Like, this is the thing. It's like, look at, why are you saying all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter? Are you saying it because you're a closet racist? Are you saying it because you just don't like the idea that this ugliness from the very recent past and today is being thrown in your face, and you have to do some hard kind of look at yourself? So change, don't say things like that. It's incendiary. You are basically inciting some kind of violence almost, in a way, by standing with the police against people who are out there simply trying to protest for their right to exist and for their right to not be shot by police unlawfully, murdered in the streets by police with no cause. Why are police pulling their firearms on people who are unarmed and have done nothing wrong? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Don't allow this to happen. You should not side with the side of the oppressor. So a long time ago, I had a debate with Carnival, and one of the things that he was constantly trying to get at is that vegans care more about animals than non-human animals. About non-human animals than they do about humans, and I simply don't think that is the case. I think the majority of vegans that I know also campaign very hard, and they work very hard to to work for human rights, and they want to make the lives of all humans better everywhere, and they do stick up for equal rights for all people, regardless of race and everything, the whole thing, gender, race, sexual preference, whatever. And that is the main thing here. That this is not a question of which one is more important. They're both important, and they both need to be addressed. And we cannot sit idly by and allow racism to continue. We have to stamp it out. We have to call it for what it is. We have to address it, and we have to not let little comments go by. And like I say, when people make kind of these like quiet racist remarks, or like things that can be construed as racist remarks, call them on it. Ask people, what do you mean by that? Why do you think it's okay to say that? And when you also kind of stick up for somebody like that, you'll be a lot more empathetic to somebody in a tough situation. Like, put yourself in that person's shoes and think about, what it is that you would want done if you were on the receiving end of that police knee on your neck. Like, why is it that it's okay that somebody can get murdered in cold blood on camera and just get away with it? and it's just a countless, you know, countless times this happens, and it's got to stop. It really does. This is no way to live, and this is no way that we can solve the huge problems that we have facing all of humanity and all of life on Earth. With climate change and with everything else that's going on, we need to make drastic systemic change. And when you look at the powers that be, they like the status quo. They like having 2 million people in prison in the US. They like that. It's cheap labor for them. Fight that. Don't buy the lies that those people deserve to be in jail. And this idea of those people, the black people, the whatever, it's not my group. You know, there's the famous quote. It's like, first they came for the whatever, then they came for the whatever, and I didn't say anything, and then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak up. That's how this works. And, yeah, I mean, that's it. I think I've said everything I want to say. Hopefully you got something out of this video. I encourage everybody to do more research on this matter for yourselves. And, yeah. I think if you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please share it with somebody that you think may, you know, benefit from hearing it. And yeah, just keep spreading this information, because we really need to stay together and, you know, stick up for each other now more than ever, I think. So thanks everybody for watching, and thanks for your support. I'll see you in another video soon. Bye.